Hello, this is John again, and today I am in my office. I've pretty much completed today's work, but I thought I'd make a quick video. Thought we would talk about dreams. I've always been fascinated with dreams, and I've always kind of kept up with my dreams. I was better at recording them more. Sometimes, it's like hit or miss. I remember some really important dreams sometime in 75, 76, I'm guessing at the time frame. But there was a 6 months period where I dreamt I was being abducted. I'm not saying it was aliens, but that was later on, looking back, that's what it kind of resembled. Simultaneously, or at the same time, every day for 6 months at 7 o'clock, we'd go to the emergency room because I was having an asthma attack. So I'm sure having 3 shots of adrenaline and a shot of Suspirin played a part in those dreams. I had a recurring dream that I was being chased by a monster. And what's significant about this one is that at one point, about age 16, I decided that was enough of waking up being afraid, and I told myself the next time I had it, I would wake up, or I would turn around in the dream and face the thing that was chasing me. Surprisingly, I remembered that resolve, and when I had the dream next, I turned around in the dream, and what was chasing me became a friend, and I never had that dream again. And I was doing that kind of stuff before I knew about lucid dreaming. One of the reasons I want to talk about this is my grandfather did some amazing things, my paternal grandfather, and like he built a boat and went down the Mississippi River with his brother. He was supposed to tell me this story, and he never got around to doing it. He died. Well, I want to leave something for my son. And one of the interesting dream stories revolves around my grandfather's passing. He died in 1992. I was living in San Antonio. My parents were in San Antonio as well. My dad went up to visit my grandmother and help with the stuff. And then my mom and I were supposed to drive up 3 days later. Well, the only way I could think of to connect with my grandfather was to have a dream. And so I went through that whole day telling myself, I will dream of my grandfather. I will dream of my grandfather. I literally did that every time I remember, I'm not thinking this is what I want to do. I reminded myself, I want to dream of my grandfather. And so I went to bed that night with that resolve and woke up the next morning with not remembering any dreams, and I was pissed. No, I was like really, really angry. And so I went out on the porch I just went out on the porch and looked up into a beautiful blue day and was pissed at God, the world, had no right being a beautiful day when I was suffering. I can tell you, I can see the pool from my porch at that time, and had like closing diamond patterns that kept reflecting over and over. I turned around to go in, and I found a white feather on the barbecue pit. I took it inside, I put that in my book, Illusions by Richard Bach, and went about my day, programming myself for the night's dreams by saying, I will dream of my grandfather, repeating that over and over and over and over. Came home, repeated the exercise, went to bed, woke up, still no dreams. Went out on the porch in the morning, and again, beautiful day, crisp, clear day. And I was still pissed, and I wanted to be like Mickey Mouse and raising the wand and making thunder and waves and brooms clashing, But I turned around and there was another white feather, and I put it in the book next to the other. and went about my day, and I did this whole thing again. Woke up the next morning, again, no dreams. Went out on the porch, and looking up at me from the ground was this little black child. I'd say 4 or 5, never seen him before. And he said something to me like, "Hey, have you seen that white dove that's been sitting on your porch?" I didn't even think about it. I just shouted down, "No," and went inside, paused, came out, picked up another white feather, put it in my book, Illusions by Richard Bach. Yeah, there's a metaphor there, isn't there? I wasn't thinking that at the time. Went and got my mom, and we drove to Abilene, where we would stay with my grandmother and do what needed to be done. So, as we were driving to Abilene from San Antonio, I was telling my mom what I was trying to do, and she immediately shut it down. She reminded me that I put too much emphasis on dreams, that it's craziness, that my dreams are elaborate because I watch too much fiction, and she didn't want to hear it. So I was quiet the rest of the journey. We got to my grandmother's house, and the first thing I did was I went and got my grandfather's keys. I held them tightly in my hand, and I sat in his chair, and that night I slept in his bed. My grandmother and grandfather had 2 separate beds, kind of like I Love Lucy. And she slept in there too. I slept in his nightshirt, and I know that sounds pretty bad, but I wanted to be close to him, and I was doing everything I could to make it possible for me to have a dream of him. And so I went to sleep that night in his bed, in his nightshirt. I could smell him. I spent most of my time that day after arriving in his study, holding his keys, and I woke up the next morning, still no dreams. So I went to the living room. My mom was up. She was sitting at the table writing. My grandmother was making breakfast. And so I sat down next to Mom. Now, bear in mind, I was grumpy, I was irritated, I was sad, I was all kinds of emotions. But I was perturbed because my mom was writing, and it wasn't what she normally did. And I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Just a moment." And I'm like, "No, what are you doing?" And she says, "Give me a second, I want to finish writing down this dream." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you do not write down dreams. You don't believe in dreams." And I reminded her of the conversation. It's just, she put down the pen, put down the paper, and says, "John, this dream is really important." I'm like, whatever. Literally just not even 24 hours earlier, she was dissing my dreams, right? So she says, "I dreamed of your grandfather, Papa." I said, "No, you did not." And she says, "Yeah, I did." And it's really interesting because I went into his room, and he was sitting on the edge of his bed. I couldn't see him on the bed, but when I looked in the mirror, I could see him sitting on the bed. And he was deliberating whether or not he should put on his slippers and leave. And I said, "You did not have this dream. You're making this up because I told you what I was trying to." She says, "No." And I told him, "You can get up and go into the light." I said, "Mom, you would not say that. That's something I would say, and it comes from a movie. And do you not remember telling me this just yesterday?" And you were in the dream, and you were telling him not to go. That was probably the most profound thing, timing-wise, synchronicity, that she could have said. I was still holding my grandfather's keys, and I dropped them. My hands had the imprint of the key, and there was kind of like blood on it. And I started crying. I cried probably a good 3 days solid. I was just inconsolable, so inconsolable that the family didn't ask me to speak at the funeral. It was the only time I have ever seen my dad cry. At the funeral, he didn't really cry, he just had tears, and I saw them. And so I gave up on the idea of dreaming of my grandfather and went back to life, 2 weeks later, I moved from San Antonio to Dallas. I was in my new apartment, and I realized I was dreaming. The move actually happened. I was actually in Dallas. I was dreaming that I was sitting on an airliner. It was a Super 80. I know that because one side of the road has 2 seats and the other side has 3. It's significant that it's a significant detail in the sense that this didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. I have a adopted brother who was sitting in front of me, and my parents were sitting in the row before him. And my grandfather was sitting with them, my parents, talking to him. The conversation that they were having, I couldn't hear it. I just know that they were talking. And time was palpable. It felt like 5-10 minutes of their conversation. And I'm in this dream, and I'm wanting to get up and go talk to him, but I'm staying in my seat, and time is passing. He got up, he came one row back, sat down with my brother, and had a conversation with him. Again, I'm not privy to what they had to say or what they were doing, but again, time passed, like a good solid 5-10 minutes. And then finally he got up, he came back one seat and sat down next to me, the aisle seat. I'm sitting in the middle seat. And he was quiet. He didn't say anything for a good 5 minutes. And it was, this passage of time again was just surreal, palpable, because in a dream you don't remember dream time usually being so precise. And so he finally broke the silence by saying, "You're taking this better than I thought you would." In the dream, I started crying, and I told him I didn't want to take it. He told me to look out the window, pointed out the window. He says, "Look out the window." And I'm like, "Why?" He says, "Look out the window and tell me what you see." So I looked out the window and I said, "I don't see anything." And he says, "Tell me what you see." And I said, "I see earth, farms, ground, houses, cars. What do you want me to say?" And he says, "That's where I'm buried. That's not where I am." And I woke up and I was crying in real life. And that was really, really significant. It was that moment that I pieced together backwards the details of my mother's dreams and how symbolic they were. The fact that I was holding onto the keys, that she only saw them in the mirror, the book with the feathers in it. The feathers are no longer around, so I don't know what that means. Maybe I just dreamt it, maybe I lost the book, I don't know. That was 92, that was a long time ago. The fact that that young kid who I never saw before, never saw again after, asked about, "Did you see the dove?" I don't know, it just, and looking backwards, it seems mystical. At the time, I was too caught up in myself to experience the extraordinary. A week later, I had another one, and again, I was at the airport. Not too surprising because I worked at the airport at that time. I worked for American Airlines, so not unusual to have dreams of airplanes or flying or destinations. But if you think about it, again, symbolically, people go to the airport for one thing, to say goodbye or to say hello. And I ran into my grandfather while passing between terminals. And he stopped and said he was on to his next destination, and I asked if I would see him again, and he said no. And that was the end of my dreams of my grandfather. I have not seen or dreamt of him since. I share that because it was a significant dream, and I've written about it, but I would like kind of a record for my son so that he has a story of me connecting with my grandfather and connecting with my father. because they're all in there. My mom's in there. I was closest to my grandfather of all the folks in my family, my paternal grandfather. And I miss him. And sometimes when I think about it, I can get teary-eyed. But the dreams suggest to me that there is more going on, and whether it's real or not, they brought comfort. And I hope this brings comfort to you, whoever it is that's listening to this. Feel free to share. Thank you for your time.